In this video, we'll go over the basics of creating scripts in Lemur. And to do that, we're going to add some behavior to this mod wheel that we created in the previous video. And we're going to make it so that when we release our finger, it snaps back to the center position. So the first thing we need to do is to actually rename this fader. So if you come into the project navigator, you can see it's currently just called fader, but we should give it a better name because we need to refer to it by name in our scripts. So I'll come down to the objects panel and I'll just rename it to mod. And I'll tick the label checkbox, and this will show the fader's title in the UI. And how about we just change the color to green? Great. So in Lemur, writing code is done with scripts. So to add a script, just select the object you want to attach a script to, come down to the bottom right of the Lemur editor and click the Create Script button. And I'm just going to call this Reset. Now, this video is intended for people with no prior programming experience, but if you are an experienced developer, I can just give you a quick head start. This is the function signature along with any arguments. Lemur is a dynamically typed language, and by default, all scripts return 0. But that's for later. Let's just keep it simple and call it reset. Okay, so what do we need to make this script work? Well, we need two things. We need some way to set the fader's value, and we need a way to detect when our finger has lifted off the fader. So if I go over to the project navigator, you can see that a fader has two properties, X and Z. X represents the fader's current value, and Z tells us whether it's touched or not. So let's just dive a bit deeper. I'm going to drag two monitor objects into the project, and these are some of the most useful widgets in Lemur because they can help you display data. So when I click a monitor, Lemur gives me this text field where I can enter the value that I want to display. And let's check out the fader's X value. So all I have to do is type the name of the fader, mod, followed by a dot to access its properties, and then X, the name of the property. So when I click away, the monitor is going to update to show the fader's current value of 0.849. So I'll put Lemur into touch emulation mode, and I'll start dragging the fader down, and you'll see the value changes, and it's falling down until it gets to the bottom and it becomes 0. And I'll drag it back up to the top, and it becomes 1. So a fader's X is its value between 0 and 1, and so we're going to want to set it in the center at 0.5. All right, so let's do the same thing for Z. Select this monitor, and I'll type mod dot Z, and I'll click away, and the monitor shows 0. So again, I'll put Lemur into touch emulation mode, and I'll hold my mouse down to simulate what it's like when I press the fader, and the monitor shows 1. And I'll release the fader, and it goes back down to 0. 1, 0. So when a fader is touched, Z becomes 1, and when it's released, it falls down to 0. Great. So all we need to do is to write a script that sets the fader's X value to 0.5 when Z falls down to 0. And we can do that easily in Lemur. So I'll select the reset script, and I can get Lemur to set the fader's X value to the center by typing the following code. X equals 0.5 semicolon. So let's go through that. X is the value we want to assign. Equals tells Lemur to assign it. 0.5 is the new value we want, and semicolon finishes the line. All lines of code in Lemur need to end in a semicolon. This is something that's common in lots of programming languages, actually, not just Lemur. So assign X to 0.5, and that's it. Great. So now we need some way to tell Lemur when to execute the script, and we can do that using execution modes. So Lemur is what's known as a reactive programming paradigm. That means that scripts can be executed in reaction to different events. So by default, this is set to manual, which doesn't use any kind of reaction, but we can use onExpression. And here, we can enter a value that we want Lemur to listen for, and when it changes, Lemur will notice this and execute. And that's exactly what we want. We want this script to execute when Z changes. So I'll just type here, Z. But we're not quite there yet because we want this script only to be executed when we lift off our finger, when Z falls down to 0. And we can do that using evaluation conditions. So in addition to having Lemur listen for changes to a value, we can have Lemur compare the old value against the new value, and then check this evaluation condition to see if it should proceed. So let's check out some of these. By default, this is set to any, and this will execute the script anytime the value changes. Doesn't matter what the old value is or the new value. Anytime this value changes, this will be executed. Rising from 0, and this will execute whenever the value used to be 0 and then rises to become a positive number. Falling to 0, this will execute when the value used to be a positive number and then falls down to 0. And this is exactly what we want. We want the script to only execute when z falls down to 0. So let's give it a try. Put Lemur into touch emulation mode and move it to a different position and release. Boom, resets to center. So let's just recap what we did. We created a script called reset, and we told Lemur to assign x to 0.5, to listen to changes to z, and execute when z falls down to 0. You might have noticed that we didn't need to type mod.x here in the script like we needed to in this monitor, and that's because this script is attached to this fader, and so Lemur can look up and see that there's a property called x, and so this x now becomes available inside the script, so this is unnecessary and it can just be deleted. Another way to put this is that x is in the same namespace as the reset script. Cool. So before we conclude, let's just check out these other execution modes. On frame, this will execute every time Lemur refreshes the screen. Lemur redraws the screen at 60 frames per second, so this will execute 60 times per second. On clock, this lets you synchronize Lemur with an external MIDI clock so that you can build sequencers, and you can even set the rhythmic subdivision. So you can use a host like Ableton Live and execute timed scripts and build some really powerful stuff. On OSC, this lets you listen to an incoming OSC message. On MIDI, and this will let you listen to an incoming MIDI message and react to some MIDI. On load, this gets executed once when the project is loaded, so you can use this to set up your project's initial state. And manual, this allows you to execute this script from another script manually. But our mod wheel needs to listen for changes to z, so I'll just put it back.